managements are doing to grow earnings.
We're starting to hear at least some investors turn perhaps a little bit more positive on Chinese equities, and we have seen it again reflected, I guess, in the performance of shares there, even though the rally has taken a bit of a breather somewhat of late. But Kieran, are you changing your sort of pessimism toward that market at all?
So I mean, we started the year, negative on China. I think we've become, over the last 8 weeks, a little more negative on China. But from a longer-term perspective, it always makes sense to pay attention to outliers, and certainly China has been an outlier. The market is cheap. It's for a reason. There's multiple self-inflicted policies that have taken us to where we are now. But against that, you only need a little bit of good news to possibly move share prices. So we think, though, ultimately you'll need a concrete resolution to the problems in the property market to be as a precursor to be able to regain the confidence of long-term foreign investment in China. So at the moment, there's a trade going on, and that makes sense. But for the return of long-term investors, we think that we're not there yet.
And I guess to your point, I can see in your notes here, India kind of stands out as an alternative investment destination instead.
Yeah, so I mean, so not just for us. I think that obviously that's where the market is, and the best performing large markets so far this year have been the U.S., Japan, and India. India, market access can sometimes be a problem. Valuation is not cheap, but it's a market that we become increasingly interested in to add, especially on any sort of weakness if we do get that.
Kieran, one of maybe the surprises so far this year has been the turnaround we've seen in Korea stocks. So much of that story seems like a familiar refrain that we're seeing play out in Japan. Do you see opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely trying to replicate at some level, what Japan has been successfully able to do over the last year in terms of becoming the corporate governance market, recognized globally. I think, the initial publication is very light on details. Ultimately, there's a lot of strong, especially tech-related names based in Korea. If the target of the Value Up program in Korea is to eliminate the Korea discount versus other regional stock markets, then maybe that's a good place to start. But again, we need if you compare what the stock exchange in Japan has done with so much detail and continuous updates, Korea's got they're not there yet. That's for sure. They've got to, fill out the program, I would say.
All right, Kieran, thanks very much for your time. That was Kieran Calder there, Head of Asia Equity Research at UBP. And let's take a look at some of the movers we're tracking, because we're just bang on 10 minutes into the session so far. And what we're taking a look at first, it relates to crypto stocks, because overnight there was that big story, Bitcoin trading above 54,000. That takes us back to a 2-year high. And so something that investors are liking, obviously, but it really does come down to people that are moving into those Bitcoin ETFs, and that's just spurring quite a lot of optimism in the sector. What else we're tracking is the steel makers, or Nippon Steel in particular here, because it is that question mark over whether Nippon Steel will be able to proceed with a planned $14.1 billion takeover of United States Steel Corp. We do understand that Nippon Steel and the United Steelworkers have signed an NDA. And so that allows essentially talks to progress, even though the union publicly maintains its opposition to that planned takeover. But you are seeing Nippon Steel here just moving a little bit higher so far. Woodside, the other name that we're tracking here, we've got that stock already an hour into trade, but we have seen it, again, holding in positive territory, not a significant move up. We did see profits sliding on lower prices, but still we had output at a record here, and that's what investors are really liking the sound of. We also want to get more details really on what they see in terms of deals, because that's another big focus of the earnings here after those talks with Santos. A smaller Australian rival collapsed last month of a potential tie-up. But we're going to be getting a big interview. Actually, Heidi's doing this one later today, speaking to the Woodside Energy CEO and Managing Director Meg O'Neill. That's about the earnings and the outlook at 2 p.m. Sydney time, 11 a.m. if you're watching in Hong Kong, Heidi.
Yeah, and coming up, the CEO of the Hong Kong-based utility, CLP, will be joining us to discuss their full-year net income miss and the outlook when it comes to their businesses across Asia, and also here in Australia. But first, the White House once again presses Republicans to unlock assistance to Ukraine as Russia's wartime economy shows resilience. We'll get the details next. This is Bloomberg.
The world needs ways to reduce carbon emissions.
We're working on solutions for our business.
Like carbon capture.
That can also help businesses like yours.
Heavy industry with low emissions. Let's deliver.
My name is Nikolai Coster-Waldau, and I believe this moment in time will be when we started to transform the way we live to inform the future we want.
Let's go to a cooler place.
This show is about solutions and the people behind them.
The worm that can actually dissolve plastic.
This would be a carbon-neutral jet fuel.
This is an optimist's guide to the planet.
Jamie Lannister on the Roomba.
Can AI make chatbots act like your very own personal assistant? Yes, with ServiceNow.
Extraordinarily high. We had to stop the order for a while because we had to understand how to manage the supply chain. So there is a strong traction of Purasangue all over the world.
How much do you worry about increasing production and therefore becoming, I guess, less high-end luxury?
We are making 13,000, 14,000 cars per year. We will not grow a lot in the future because we want to grow more for value, not for volume. And maybe one number, you know how many cars Ferrari did we put on the road since the beginning, since the first one? 250, 260,000. So 250,000 cars in a market where there are million and million cars every year.
DOJ or other authorities.
Could face bigger challenges next.
It was going to keep Green World Cup. This is a three.
As the economic picture
Covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
Some of the top geopolitical stories that we're following this hour. US President Joe Biden is hoping that negotiators can secure a temporary ceasefire between Israel and Hamas soon. Discussions on a pause in fighting in exchange for the release of more hostages taken by Hamas have intensified in recent days, with Biden saying a ceasefire could come as soon as next Monday. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan earlier said representatives from Israel, the US, Egypt and Qatar meeting in Paris had signed an agreement on the broad contours of a hostage deal. The Palestinian Authority's Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh has tendered his government's resignation. The official Palestinian newswire says PA President Mahmoud Abbas had asked the government to stay on as caretaker until a new administration had formed. The US and Arab countries in the region have pushed for a reformed Palestinian Authority since the Israel-Hamas war broke out in October. Iran has reduced its stockpile of near bomb-grade uranium over the past 3 months, easing some fears of a wider Middle East conflict. Nuclear inspectors from the UN watchdog say Tehran's holdings have dropped 5% since November, but that still means Iran has the technical knowledge and material to fuel several nuclear weapons within weeks. Ukraine says the European Union has only delivered about a third of the artillery ammunition the bloc pledged for the country. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told reporters on Sunday that the bloc had already delivered more than 500,000 rounds. As the war against Russia grinds into its third year, Kyiv is looking for weapons as a lifeline as a US military aid package remains stuck in Congress. China wants Australia to actively support its efforts to join the CPTPP trade bloc. The two nations' trade ministers have met on the sidelines of the World Trade Organization conference in Abu Dhabi. Bloomberg's Paul Allen joins us now. And Paul, how much closer is China to joining the bloc, and what does it want from Australia?
Well, the ball is incrementally further down the field. This meeting between Don Farrell, the Australian Trade Minister, and Wang Wentao, the Chinese Trade Minister, yesterday resulted in this request, really, China asking Australia to actively support China's ascension to that trade bloc. Now, this would be a minor shift from Australia's current position, where it says it doesn't object to China joining the CPTPP. So this is where China's at the moment. It's courting all of the members of that trade bloc. There was also a meeting with New Zealand's Trade Minister on the sidelines as well, and unanimous support of all member countries is needed. China also urged Australia to address the issues that Chinese businesses face in the country. It didn't really go into specifics. It was quite a short statement, but that is emblematic of the problems that this relationship continues to have. There are still some trade strikes in place against Australian exports. We talked about wine yesterday. They're expected to be gone soon, but lobster, a handful of abattoirs as well. And then there's the issue of Yang Hengjun, the Australian academic who's facing a suspended death sentence in China at the moment as well on espionage charges. So still a few things to resolve before Australia would actively support China's ascension as it wishes. But there's other issues clouding this as well. And just for example, Taiwan's interested in joining the bloc, and that would make things more complex at the risk of understatement.
And Paul, there's been such a big and protracted push for reform at the WTO, but it's sort of easier said than done. So what's the latest on that?
Yeah, I think you captured the spirit, really. There's a lot of talk. That talk matching deeds is always the challenging part. We did hear from the Director General, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, in her opening remarks. She was talking about the need to repair the multilateral trading system. She called it strained. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a delegate that didn't think that was a fair description. But there are always tensions here, right? India, for example, the Commerce Minister of India will arrive today. India wants legal certainty around subsidies. Other countries like Australia oppose the shielding of subsidies. So this underscores the difficulty of finding agreement among a bloc as large as this one. There are 164 members. 2 more got welcomed as well. East Timor and Comoros have joined the WTO. So the body keeps growing, but finding goal alignment within that body very, very difficult. Aside from that problem, the Director General also talked about sluggish demand globally, with the exception of the US and India, and also this target for global growth of 3.3%. Well, the WTO set that before the Israel-Hamas war. So the Director General saying, well, look, that might be a little bit optimistic now.
Paul Allen in Sydney there, and the UK Trade Minister Greg Hands says the economy will feel the impact of slower global growth and the turmoil in the Red Sea. Hands spoke to Bloomberg at the WTO ministerial meeting in Abu Dhabi.
I think it always concerns us when growth is undershooting what people are forecasting and what people want. Higher growth means greater prosperity, greater tax revenues for governments. There's strong reasons why we want global growth to recover. That's why the UK, for example, is taking strong action in the Red Sea in concert with our allies to make sure that trade continues to flow and that the world does not suffer unduly from events in the Middle East.
You did mention that developing countries should benefit as much as richer nations, and that this particular conference has been about that. What about the digital goods tariff moratorium?
Yeah.
Does that get renewed for another 2 or more years?
Well, this is essential for the World Trade Organization. I mean, this would be really going backwards for it not to be renewed. This would mean that there would suddenly be the potential for customs duties on anything from sharing a Spotify through to Netflix, through to potentially anything that could be transmitted digitally could be subject to customs duties. Now, we think this would be a really retrograde step to go back 20 years or more when there are customs duties on electronic transmissions. We think that it benefits the whole world and developing countries in particular to not have duties on digital transactions.
Sure, nonetheless, some developing countries might see it as a chip to use in their favour if they could bargain with it, for example.
Well, our own estimates are that developing countries, whatever they might gain from the tax revenues from this, would be dwarfed by the losses to GDP. So 20 to 30 times as much loss in GDP compared to what they might gain out of tax revenue. So it's strongly against the interests of developing countries. It's against the interests of everybody. To put these customs duties on something which obviously people expect to flow pretty freely around the world.
Well, can your delegation help convince everybody else? What are the odds that this doesn't get done? I mean, you have to convince Indonesia, India and possibly other countries to go along with it.
I think we've got about 130 or 140 countries now have agreed that to not put customs duties on e-commerce transactions, or to, in this case, roll over the e-commerce moratorium. That's a pretty good position. I think the large number of developing countries and some very large developing countries agree with us that it would not be a good way forward.
Talk to us about the free trade agreement with India. Is it going to get signed before India goes to elections, likely late April?
Well, look, we've always said that what is important is the deal, not the date. What is important is what is going to be in the deal, and that negotiation is live at the moment.
What are the sticking points preventing it from getting done and dusted?
Well, look, there's a huge amount that you can do with India. There's so much can be done on a trade agreement with India. It wouldn't be right for me to say where are the areas that are being more difficult, but obviously we are looking forward to getting something done. We're putting a lot of time and effort into it across the whole of the UK system and on the Indian side as well.
UK Trade Minister Greg Hunt speaking with Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn. You can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Bloomberg subscribers can find that at Debut Go in their terminals. It's also available on the mobile in the Bloomberg Anywhere app. You can customize those settings as well, so you just get the news on the industries and assets that matter to you. This is Bloomberg.
The world needs ways to reduce carbon emissions.